The sun was just creeping over the horizon, casting a golden glow across my backyard, where the koi pond shimmered like a jewel in the early morning light. I'd spent nearly 15 years turning this little slice of rural America into my sanctuary, a place where the only sounds were the soft croak of frogs, the gentle splash of fish, and the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. My home, a modest but sturdy two-story with a wraparound porch, sat at the edge of a quiet neighborhood, the kind of place where people waved from their mailboxes and kids rode bikes until the streetlights flickered on. I'd built the pond by hand, hauling stones and digging clay until my back ached, all to create a haven for my koi and a spot where I could sip coffee and feel the world slow down. It wasn't just a pond. It was a promise to myself that peace was worth fighting for. But peace, as I'd soon learn, has a way of attracting chaos, especially when that chaos comes in the form of a blonde, entitled neighbor named Karen. 6 months ago, Karen rolled into our sleepy little community like a thunderstorm nobody saw coming. She bought the house just beyond the tree line, about 30 yards from my property, a modern McMansion with too many windows and a driveway that screamed, "Look at me." At first, I didn't think much of it. New neighbors come and go, and most of them settle into the rhythm of the place, mowing their lawns, joining the occasional block party, respecting the unspoken rules of rural life. But Karen wasn't most neighbors. From the moment she arrived, it was clear she didn't just want to live here. She wanted to dominate. Her presence was loud, not just in the metaphorical sense, but in the very real, ear-splitting roar of her $12,000 camel-wrapped ATV that she drove like she was auditioning for a Mad Max sequel. The first time I heard that ATV, I was watering the koi pond, a hose in one hand and a mug of black coffee in the other. The engine's high-pitched whine cut through the morning like a chainsaw through butter. I froze, thinking maybe it was a one-off, some delivery guy who'd taken a wrong turn. But then I saw her, Karen, blonde hair tied back in a ponytail, sunglasses perched on her nose, tearing across the footpath that ran along the edge of my property. That path was my pride and joy, a narrow trail I'd carved out over years for walking my dog, Rusty, and tending to the pond. It was lined with wildflowers and shaded by oaks, a quiet thread connecting my land to the rest of the neighborhood. I'd never had to post signs or mark boundaries because, until Karen, nobody had ever treated it like their personal racetrack. She didn't just drive through once. Oh no, that would have been too easy. Karen made it her daily ritual, revving that ATV at all hours, mornings when I was trying to enjoy my coffee, afternoons when Rusty was napping on the porch, even late evenings when the stars were out and the neighborhood was supposed to be asleep. The noise was relentless, a mechanical scream that drowned out the frogs and sent the koi darting to the bottom of the pond in panic. I'd stand there, watching her tear up the trail, kicking up dirt and snapping branches, and wonder what kind of person thought this was okay. It wasn't just the noise, it was the attitude. Karen didn't just drive. She performed, leaning into curves like she was on a motocross circuit, glancing over her shoulder as if daring someone to challenge her. I'm not one for confrontation. Never have been. I'm the guy who nods politely at the grocery store, holds the door for strangers, and keeps to himself unless there's a reason to speak up. But after a week of Karen's ATV assaults, I knew I had to do something. I started small, walking over to her property one evening with Rusty trotting beside me. Her house looked like it belonged in a magazine, perfectly manicured lawn, a fountain out front, and a garage big enough to hold a small plane. I knocked on the door, half expecting her to be reasonable. She answered in yoga pants and a tank top, her hair still in that ponytail, and gave me a look like I was a salesman peddling expired coupons. "Hey," I said, keeping my tone friendly. "I'm your neighbor, live just over the tree line. I've noticed you've been using the path on my property with your ATV. It's private land, and I'd appreciate it if you could stick to your own yard." Karen didn't blink. She tilted her head, smirked, and said, "Private land? That little dirt trail? Honey, it's practically a public road. I'm not hurting anything. Her voice had that syrupy condescension, the kind that makes you feel like you're the one being unreasonable for existing. It's not a public road, I said, still calm. I maintain it, and it's on my property. The noise is disturbing the neighborhood, and you're tearing up the path. I'm just asking you to respect the boundary. She laughed, a sharp, barking sound that made Rusty's ears perk up. Respect the boundary? Oh, please. I own a half-acre here. I can do what I want. Maybe you should lighten up. And with that, she shut the door in my face. I stood there for a moment, stunned. The kind of stunned you feel when you realize someone isn't just rude, they're a walking manifesto of entitlement. Rusty looked up at me, his brown eyes confused, and I scratched his head as we walked back home. I wasn't angry yet, just annoyed, but I knew this wasn't over. Karen wasn't the type to back down, and I wasn't about to let her turn my backyard into her personal playground. The next few weeks were a test of patience. Karen didn't just ignore my request, she doubled down. The ATV rides got longer, louder, more frequent. She'd blast music from a Bluetooth speaker strapped to the handlebars, some mix of pop and country that clashed with the natural soundtrack of the woods. She started bringing friends over, other women from what I later learned was her yoga club, and they'd stand at the edge of her property, cheering her on like she was competing in the X Games. The path, once smooth and lined with clover, was now a mess of ruts and churned up dirt. I found tire tracks veering dangerously close to the pond, where the ground was soft and the koi were vulnerable. One morning, I even found a crushed wildflower, a purple coneflower I'd planted years ago, mashed into the mud under her tire marks. I tried reasoning with her again, this time leaving a note in her mailbox since she'd made it clear she wasn't open to face-to-face talks. The note was polite, professional, explaining the property lines and offering to show her the deed if she had questions. I came home the next day to find the note torn in half, stuffed back in my own mailbox with a post-it that read, "Get a life, loser." That's when I started to get mad, not the yelling kind of mad, but the quiet, calculated kind that makes you start planning. I went to the county records office and pulled the property survey, just to be sure I wasn't imagining things. The map was clear, the path, the pond. The entire strip of land Karen was treating like her personal highway belonged to me, down to the last blade of grass. Armed with that, I decided to escalate, but not in a way that would give her the satisfaction of a shouting match. I ordered wooden signs online, the kind you'd see at a national park, sturdy and professional. Each one read, "Private property, no trespassing. Keep off trail." I spent a weekend hammering them into the ground along the path, spacing them every 10 yards so there was no way she could miss them. I even painted the posts with reflective tape, thinking maybe she'd claim she couldn't see them in the dark. For good measure, I installed a couple of solar-powered lights to illuminate the signs at night. It wasn't subtle, but it wasn't aggressive either, just a clear message: this is my land, and you're not welcome. The signs didn't work. If anything, they made things worse. The next morning, I woke up to find one of the signs missing. I walked the trail and found it snapped in half, the pieces left on my porch like a taunt. Karen had escalated, and now it was personal. I stood there, holding the broken wood, and felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just about a noisy ATV anymore. It was about respect, boundaries, and the kind of person who thinks they can bulldoze both because they have money and a loud toy. I wasn't going to let her win, but I wasn't going to stoop to her level either. I had a plan, and it started with playing smarter, not louder. I went back to the hardware store and bought more signs, this time reinforcing them with metal stakes driven deep into the ground. I also ordered a trail camera, the kind hunters use, motion-activated and weatherproof. I mounted it on a tree overlooking the path, angled to catch anyone who came through. I wasn't looking for a fight, I just wanted evidence. If Karen was going to keep trespassing, I'd have proof of every reckless stunt she pulled. I checked the county laws, too, and learned that repeated trespassing could lead to fines or even criminal charges if it came to that. I didn't want it to go that far, but I was done being the nice guy who let his backyard get trashed. While I was at it, I reached out to the HOA. Our neighborhood had a homeowners association, but it was usually a sleepy outfit, more focused on approving fence colors than handling real disputes. I wrote a formal complaint, detailing Karen's trespassing, the noise violations, and the damage to my property. I included photos of the ruts, the broken sign, and the survey map for good measure. I figured they'd at least send her a warning, maybe fine her for disturbing the peace. But a week later, I got a response that made my jaw drop. After review, we find no actionable violations. Please resolve this matter privately. No explanation, no follow-up, just a brush-off. It didn't take long to figure out why. Karen's cousin, Mitch, had just been elected vice president of the HOA. I'd met Mitch once at a community picnic, a sweaty, loud guy who talked over everyone and smelled like cheap cologne. He wasn't exactly the poster child for impartiality, and it was clear he'd used his new position to shield Karen from any consequences. Nepotism, it seemed, was stronger than neighborly decency. I wasn't surprised, but I was disappointed. The HOA was supposed to protect the community, not pick favorites. Still, I didn't push back right away. I had other plans, and I wasn't about to tip my hand. By now, Karen's ATV rides had become a neighborhood spectacle. Other residents started noticing, and not in a good way. My next-door neighbor, Carla, a retired schoolteacher with a sharp tongue and a love for birdwatching, complained that the noise was scaring off the cardinals she'd been trying to photograph. Another neighbor, an older guy named Tom who'd lived here longer than I had, grumbled about the dust clouds Karen's tires kicked up, coating his vegetable garden. People were talking, but nobody wanted to confront her directly. Karen had a way of making you feel small, like you were the problem for daring to question her. She wasn't just loud, she was intimidating, the kind of person who'd turn a simple disagreement into a full-blown war. I started keeping a log of her trespasses, noting the dates, times, and what she did each time she roared through. The trail camera was a goldmine, capturing her in high definition, sunglasses on, ponytail bouncing, sometimes flipping off the signs as she passed. I had dozens of clips, each one a little more brazen than the last. One video even caught her stopping to take a selfie in front of a sign, sticking out her tongue like a teenager. It was ridiculous, but it was also proof that she knew exactly what she was doing. She wasn't confused about the property line. She just didn't care. I also started talking to other neighbors, quietly, to gauge how they felt. Most were annoyed but hesitant to get involved. "She's a bully," Carla said one afternoon, pouring me a glass of iced tea on her porch. "But she's got Mitch in her pocket, and that ATV's worth more than my car. What are we supposed to do?" I didn't have an answer yet, but I was working on it. I'd lived here too long, put too much into this place, to let Karen's ego run roughshod over it. My home wasn't just a house, it was a refuge, a testament to years of hard work and careful stewardship. The pond, the path, the wild flowers, they were mine, and I wasn't going to let her take them. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of pink and orange, I sat on my porch and watched the koi glide through the water. Rusty was curled up at my feet, snoring softly, and for a moment, everything felt right. But then I heard it, the distant growl of Karen's ATV, revving up for another joyride. I sighed, picked up my phone, and checked the trail camera's live feed. Sure enough, there she was, tearing through the path, ignoring the signs, kicking up dirt like she owned the place. I saved the clip, added it to my growing collection, and made a decision. This wasn't just about noise or trespassing anymore. It was about standing up to someone who thought the rules didn't apply to her, who thought she could steamroll anyone who got in her way. I didn't know it. It was a Saturday morning, the kind that felt like a gift from the universe. The air was crisp, the sun hung low in a sky so blue it looked painted, and the birds were out in full chorus, flitting between the oaks that framed my backyard. I was on my porch, barefoot, cradling a steaming mug of coffee, the kind I brewed strong enough to wake the dead. Rusty, my old mutt, was sprawled out beside me, his tail thumping lazily against the wood as he dreamed of chasing squirrels. The koi pond glittered under the morning light, the fish gliding in lazy circles, their scales catching the sun like tiny prisms. For a moment, everything was perfect, my little slice of rural heaven, hard-earned and fiercely protected. But perfection, as I'd learned in the 6 months since Karen moved in, was fragile. And sure enough, the piece shattered with the high-pitched scream of her $12,000 camel-wrapped ATV, a sound that had become the neighborhood's unofficial alarm clock. I'd been dealing with Karen's nonsense for half a year now, her relentless trespassing, her ear-splitting joyrides, her smug dismissal of every attempt to reason with her. She'd turned my quiet footpath, a trail I'd carved out for walking Rusty and tending the pond, into her personal racetrack. My signs, sturdy, reflective, screaming private property, keep off trail, were nothing to her. She'd snapped one in half and left it on my porch like a middle finger in splintered wood. The HOA, useless thanks to her cousin Mitch's nepotism, had brushed off my complaints. So I'd escalated quietly, legally, with metal-reinforced signs, solar lights, and a trail camera that caught her every stunt in crisp detail. I wasn't looking for a fight, but I was ready for one. And on that Saturday, fate decided to hand me a front-row seat to the most absurd, satisfying fight I'd ever witness. The morning had started like any other, with me savoring the quiet and mentally planning my day, maybe some weeding by the pond, maybe a trip to the hardware store for more mulch. But the ATV's roar cut through my thoughts, closer this time, more aggressive. I set my coffee down, already bracing for another round of Karen's chaos. Then I heard voices, plural. Not just her usual solo performance, but a chorus of giggles and shouts, like a crowd at a tailgate. I stepped to the edge of the porch, squinting toward her property, and saw them, a gaggle of women, maybe 8 or 10, clustered at the boundary where her lawn met my trees. They were decked out in athleisure, all bright leggings and oversized sunglasses, clutching water bottles and phones. Karen's yoga club, I'd later learn, her personal cheer squad for whatever madness she was about to unleash. Karen herself was the star of the show, perched on her ATV like a queen on a throne. She'd swapped her usual ponytail for loose blonde waves, her hair catching the breeze like she'd stepped out of a shampoo commercial. Her outfit was peak Karen, a pink athletic suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage, paired with sunglasses so big they could have doubled as a windshield. She revved the engine, the ATV growling like a caged animal, and the women clapped and hooped, their voices carrying across the morning air. I stood there, arms crossed, trying to figure out what fresh hell she was planning. I'd seen her show off before, but this was different, calculated, theatrical, like she was about to attempt something stupid and wanted an audience to validate it. At first, I didn't think much of it. Just another noisy moment to endure, another clip for the trail camera to file away. I figured she'd do her usual lap, tear up some more dirt, and move on. But then she did something that made my stomach lurch. She pointed directly at the trail, my trail, the one lined with signs she'd ignored for months. Her arm was outstretched, her posture cocky, like a general rallying troops. Over the engine's roar, I heard her shout, "Watch this, ladies. Redneck Rally time." The words hit me like a slap. Redneck Rally? This wasn't just trespassing anymore. It was a performance, a deliberate middle finger to me, my property, and every boundary I'd set. My coffee was forgotten on the porch rail as I stepped forward, my heart pounding not with fear, but with the kind of clarity you get when you know things are about to go sideways. Karen gunned it. The ATV lurched forward, tires spitting dirt and gravel as she launched toward the trail. The women cheered louder, some raising their phones to record, their laughter sharp and mocking. I could have run out, waved my arms, yelled for her to stop, but I didn't. Something told me to stay put. to let this play out. Maybe it was instinct, maybe it was the trail camera blinking its red light from the tree, but I stood frozen, watching as she hit the path at full speed. The signs, bright, unmistakable, practically screaming "stay out," flashed past her like props in her personal action movie. She didn't slow down, didn't hesitate, just leaned into the throttle, her hair streaming behind her like a battle flag. Then it happened. The trail, as familiar to me as my own heartbeat, wasn't just a flat stretch of dirt. A few days earlier, I dug a small irrigation trench to redirect runoff from the pond, a shallow rut, maybe 2 feet deep, hidden in the morning shadows and covered by a thin layer of leaves. It wasn't meant to be a trap, just a practical fix for water pooling near the koi. But at the speed Karen was going, that trench was a landmine. Her front wheels hit it hard, the ATV bucking like a bronco. For a split second, I thought she'd recover, maybe swerve and keep going. But physics had other plans. The trench acted like a ramp, launching the ATV and Karen into the air. Time slowed down, the way it does when you're witnessing something so absurd your brain needs extra seconds to process it. Karen was airborne, her body lifting off the seat, her mouth open in a silent scream that was equal parts shock and exhilaration. The ATV twisted beneath her, its camel wrap glinting in the sun like a missile from a fever dream. Her hair whipped wildly, no longer shampoo commercial perfect, but a tangled mess of blonde chaos. The yoga club's cheers turned to gasps, phones still raised, but now frozen in disbelief. And then, with a precision that felt scripted by some cosmic comedian, the ATV arced through the air like a lawn dart from hell and plunged straight into my koi pond. The splash was biblical. A geyser of water shot up, scattering lily pads and sending frogs leaping for cover. The koi darted to the depths, their sanctuary violated by 600 pounds of metal and entitlement. The ATV sank slowly, its engine gurgling as it disappeared beneath the surface, leaving only a trail of bubbles and a faint sheen of oil. For a moment, there was silence, complete, eerie silence, broken only by the distant croak of a frog and the soft drip of water falling back to the pond. I stood there, blinking, my brain replaying the scene in slow motion. Karen's flight, the splash, the sheer absurdity of it all. It was like I'd hallucinated the world's most ridiculous neighborhood stunt, a moment so perfect I almost wanted to applaud. Then Karen's head broke the surface. She emerged like a swamp creature, her hair matted with algae, her pink suit soaked and clinging to her like a second skin. Her sunglasses were gone, lost to the pond's depths, and her eyes were wide with a mix of fury and betrayal, as if I'd personally pushed her into the water. She flailed, coughing and spitting, her arms thrashing as she tried to find solid ground. The yoga club stood frozen at the property line, their phones still up, but no longer recording, their faces a mix of horror and suppressed laughter. One woman, braver than the rest, fumbled with her phone, maybe calling for help, maybe just texting the group chat. Karen finally dragged herself to the bank, collapsing in a heap of mud and pond scum, looking less like a yoga influencer and more like something that had crawled out of a B-movie horror flick. I didn't move. I didn't laugh, didn't shout, didn't even blink. I just stood on my porch, coffee cold in my hand, watching the chaos unfold. Karen, true to form, didn't apologize or even acknowledge her own recklessness. Instead, she pointed a shaking, algae-covered finger at me and screamed, "You're going to pay for this. You set me up." Her voice was shrill, cracking with rage, as if I'd dug that trench specifically to launch her into my pond, as if I'd spent my days plotting her aquatic demise. She flung a handful of pond scum at the sky, like a toddler throwing a tantrum, and kept yelling, "This is your fault. You'll hear from my lawyer." The yoga club murmured, some backing away, others whispering to each other, clearly rethinking their allegiance to their fearless leader. That was the moment I knew this wasn't over. Karen wasn't just embarrassed. She was unhinged, convinced I'd orchestrated her crash like some evil genius, with a vendetta against ATVs. I knew, with a certainty that settled in my gut like a stone, that I'd be in court within a week. This wasn't about a ruined vehicle or a bruised ego. It was about Karen's worldview, one where she was always the victim and everyone else was a villain. I watched her limp to her feet, still shouting threats, her designer jacket dripping pond water, her phone kept in a pink chest holster, now a casualty of the Koi's domain. The yoga club scattered, some offering half-hearted support, others slipping away to avoid the fallout. Karen, undeterred, kept pointing at me, her voice echoing through the trees. "You're done. You hear me? Done." I turned and walked back inside, not because I was scared, but because I needed a moment to process the sheer lunacy of what I'd just seen. I grabbed a towel, not for Karen, but for myself, because I was dangerously close to collapsing in laughter. My hands shook as I poured a fresh cup of coffee. The image of her flying through the air burned into my brain like a sports highlight reel. I stepped back onto the porch, towel draped over my shoulder, and watched as Karen limped toward her property, still muttering curses. The ATV was still in the pond, its handlebars just visible above the water, a monument to her hubris. I sipped my coffee, letting the warmth ground me, and waited for the next act in this absurd drama. By the time the sheriff arrived, Karen had transformed her crash into a full-blown medical emergency. She was sitting on her lawn, surrounded by a few loyal yoga club members, clutching her ankle and claiming a sudden backache. She'd also developed what she called minor memory loss due to pond trauma, a phrase so ridiculous I had to bite my lip to keep from snorting. She was a vision of melodramatic vengeance, her hair still dripping, her suit ruined, demanding an ambulance and muttering legal threats. The deputy, a guy named Carl who'd known me for years, gave me a tired look as he approached. Carl was the kind of cop who'd seen it all: bar fights, cow tipping, even a dispute over a stolen garden gnome, but this was clearly a new one for him. "You got any footage of this?" he asked, scratching his head as he glanced at the pond, where the ATV's handlebars glinted mockingly. I nodded and handed him the SD card from the trail camera. "It's all there." She ignored the signs, hit the trench, went airborne. "Not my fault." Carl sighed, the sigh of a man who knew he was about to spend his day untangling Karen's lies. "All right, I'll take a look. Stay put." 2 hours later, a tow truck rolled up, its driver staring at the pond like he'd been asked to retrieve a spaceship. The ATV was hauled out, covered in green slime and reeking of mildew, looking less like a luxury vehicle and more like a prop from a post-apocalyptic movie. Karen limped after it, snapping pictures with a backup phone she'd produced from somewhere, cursing me under her breath. I watched from the porch, rusty at my feet, my second cup of coffee in hand. The neighbor's dog, a scruffy terrier named Max, had wandered over and was sniffing the air, clearly unimpressed by the spectacle. Karen's voice carried through the trees as she climbed into her car, still shouting about lawyers and lawsuits. I shook my head, almost pitying her. Almost. Sure enough, a week later, a thick envelope landed in my mailbox, delivered by a courier who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. I slid it open and found a legal complaint that read like a fever dream. Karen was suing me for damages to her ATV, emotional trauma, reckless landscaping, and my personal favorite, ecosystem contamination from hazardous koi waste. The claims were so absurd I had to read them twice, half convinced I'd missed the punchline. She was asking for $50,000, plus court fees, plus an injunction to fill in the pond. I stared at the papers, then looked out at the koi, swimming lazily under the sun, blissfully unaware of their alleged toxicity. I could have laughed, but the weight of it hit me. Karen wasn't just annoying anymore. She was dangerous, willing to weaponize the legal system to soothe her bruised ego. I called Nina, my lawyer, a woman who'd once shut down an HOA noise complaint with a single letter and a glare that could melt steel. Nina was sharp, relentless, and had a personal grudge against Karen from years ago, when Karen had thrown a tantrum over a noise ordinance Nina had helped pass. I explained the situation, from the trespassing to the crash to the lawsuit, and sent her the trail camera footage. She listened quietly, then let out a low whistle. "She's suing you for coy waste? Oh, we're going to have fun with this." I hung up, feeling a flicker of hope. The trail camera had caught everything: Karen's reckless charge, her ignoring the signs, her Redneck Rally taunt. But then I remembered something else. Carla, my birdwatching neighbor, had a wildlife camera pointed at the woods, one that might have caught the crash from a different angle. I walked over to her house that afternoon, Rusty trotting behind me, and found her in her garden, pruning roses. I explained what had happened, and her eyes lit up. "You're telling me Karen flew into your pond?" she said, setting down her shears. "Hang on, let me check my camera." She led me inside, where her computer was already open to a live feed of her backyard. She scrolled through the footage, and there it was, a crystal clear 4K video of the entire incident, shot from a side angle that showed every detail. Karen revving the ATV, her friends cheering, her shouting, "Watch this," before charging the trail. The camera caught the moment she hit the trench, her gleeful "airborne" baby as the ATV launched, and the spectacular splash that followed. It was better than my trail cam, better than anything I could have hoped for. Carla grinned, her usually stern face breaking into a rare smile. "This," she said, copying the file to a USB drive, "is going to bury her." I thanked her, clutching the drive like it was a winning lottery ticket, and headed home. The lawsuit was laughable, but Karen had a lawyer, her ex-husband, Darren, a sleazeball with a history of ethical violations and a reputation for losing cases. Still, I wasn't taking chances. With Nina, the trail cam, and Carla's 4K nuke, I was ready for war. Karen thought she could bully me into submission, but she'd miscalculated. She wasn't just fighting me, she was fighting logic, evidence, and a community that was starting to see her for what she was. As I sat on my porch that night, watching the koi swim under the stars, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: confidence. Karen had crashed, and she was about to learn what happens when you try to sue a man who's got truth, a good lawyer, and a pond full of koi on his side. The courtroom smelled like old wood and bureaucracy, a cramped space with flickering fluorescent lights, and a gallery of mismatched chairs that creaked under the weight of anticipation. I sat in the defendant's chair, my hands folded on the table, feeling the eyes of the neighborhood on my back. It was a small crowd: Carla, Tom, a few other neighbors who'd grown tired of Karen's antics, and, of course, Mitch, her cousin, slouched in the back row like a man hoping to be invisible. Across the aisle, Karen was in full performance mode, decked out like a soap opera star at a funeral, white neck brace cinched tight, dark sunglasses perched indoors, a massive folder of papers clutched to her chest like a shield. Her lawyer, Darren, her ex-husband, a greasy caricature of a small-town attorney, shuffled beside her, his cheap suit straining at the seams. I wasn't nervous, not exactly. I was exhausted, amused, and just a little exhilarated, like a boxer stepping into the ring, knowing he's got a knockout punch ready. Thanks to Nina, my lawyer, and a mountain of evidence, I wasn't just prepared to fight Karen's ridiculous lawsuit, I was ready to bury it. The lawsuit itself was a masterpiece of delusion. Karen was suing me for $50,000, claiming damages to her waterlogged ATV, emotional trauma from her pond plunge, reckless landscaping for the irrigation trench she'd hit, and, most absurdly, ecosystem contamination from my koi's alleged hazardous waste. It was the kind of legal fiction that could only come from someone who believed reality bent to their whims. She'd filed the complaint a week after her spectacular crash, when her camel-wrapped ATV had launched off my trench and landed in my koi pond, scattering fish and sending her yoga club into stunned silence. She'd emerged from the water, algae in her hair, screaming that I'd set her up, as if I'd spent my days engineering traps for entitled neighbors. The trail camera had caught every second of her recklessness, her ignoring my private property signs, her shouting Redneck Rally time. And Carla's 4K wildlife cam had sealed the deal with a side-angle view that was practically cinematic. But Karen wasn't one to let facts get in her way. She turned her self-inflicted disaster into a crusade, and now here we were, in a courtroom that felt too small for the drama she'd unleashed. Nina sat beside me, her navy blazer crisp, her expression calm but predatory, like a cat watching a mouse scurry too close to the trap. She'd been my secret weapon from the moment I called her, a lawyer with a razor-sharp mind and a personal vendetta against Karen from a years-old HOA feud. Nina had reviewed the complaint with a mix of disbelief and glee, laughing so hard at the coy-waist claim that she'd had to set down her coffee. "This isn't a lawsuit," she'd said, pushing up her glasses. "It's a tantrum with a letterhead." She'd spent the last week building our defense, a fortress of permits, photos, and video evidence that left no room for Karen's lies. We weren't just going to win, we were going to dismantle her entire narrative, piece by absurd piece. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Marjorie Holt, took her seat with the air of someone who'd seen too many frivolous cases to tolerate theatrics. Her gray hair was pulled back tightly, her eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses, and her mouth twitched slightly when Karen adjusted her neck brace with a dramatic sigh. That was our first small victory, a sign that Judge Holt wasn't buying the performance before it even started. Darren stood to deliver his opening statement, and I braced myself for the nonsense. He cleared his throat, his voice a mix of false confidence and nervous stammer, and launched into a story so wild it could have been ripped from a bad courtroom drama. He painted Karen as a victim of my calculated landscape weapon, accusing me of installing deceptive topographical hazards with malicious engineering. The phrases were so over the top I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. Malicious engineering? I dug a 2-foot trench to manage pond runoff, not to launch ATVs into orbit. But Darren kept going, claiming I'd created an environmental trap to humiliate Karen, a vibrant community member who was simply enjoying her property. The gallery murmured, a mix of disbelief and amusement. Carla, sitting 2 rows back, coughed to cover a snort. Mitch shifted uncomfortably, his face red, clearly regretting his decision to attend. Karen, meanwhile, nodded along, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue she'd produced from nowhere, as if Darren's words were moving her to tears. It was a performance for the ages, but Judge Holt's expression didn't budge. Her pen scratched notes, her eyebrow arched just enough to signal she was already skeptical. When Darren finally sat down, winded from his own hyperbole, Nina stood, and the room felt like it leaned forward to listen. Nina's opening was a masterclass in restraint and precision. She didn't raise her voice, didn't gesture wildly, just laid out the facts like a surgeon placing instruments on a tray. She started with the history of my property, explaining how I'd lived there for 15 years, built the koi pond by hand, and maintained the footpath as a private trail for personal use. She presented the county-approved permits for the pond, dated long before Karen's McMansion even existed, proving it was a legal and protected feature. She described my efforts to stop Karen's trespassing, polite conversations, written notes, reflective signs, solar lights, all ignored or outright mocked. She lingered on the broken sign Karen had left on my porch, holding up a photo for the judge to see, the splintered wood a silent witness to Karen's defiance. And then she pivoted to the crash itself, her tone dry, but laced with just enough humor to make the room lean in closer. The plaintiff, Nina said, glancing at Karen, chose to drive her ATV at high speed across private property, ignoring multiple warnings, and collided with a shallow irrigation trench. A trench that was clearly marked and entirely within the defendant's rights to maintain. The result was not a trap, but a consequence. She paused, letting the word hang in the air. Ms. Karen's own actions led to her vehicle landing in a pond, and now she seeks to blame the defendant for her reckless behavior. We have evidence, video evidence, that will show exactly what happened. The courtroom buzzed, and Judge Holt's pen stopped moving. She looked at Nina, then at Darren, who was already fidgeting with his tie. "Proceed with the evidence," she said, her voice flat but curious. The bailiff dimmed the lights, and a screen flickered to life at the front of the room. Nina queued up the trail camera footage first, the grainy but clear video showing Karen's ATV roaring past the signs, her voice audible as she shouted, "Watch this," to her yoga club. The camera caught the moment she hit the trench, the ATV launching, and her brief, glorious flight before the splash. The room was silent, save for the faint hum of the projector and the creak of Karen's chair as she shifted uncomfortably. But Nina wasn't done. She switched to Carla's 4K wildlife cam footage, and the difference was staggering. The video was pristine, the colors vivid, the sound crystal clear. It showed the entire scene from a side angle. Karen revving the engine, her friends cheering, her yelling "Redneck Rally time" as she charged the trail. The signs were unmistakable, glowing in the morning light, and Karen's laughter, "Airborne, baby," rang out just before the crash. The splash was even more dramatic from this angle, water exploding like a geyser, lily pads scattering, and Karen's flailing form disappearing beneath the surface. When the video ended, the silence was deafening, broken only by a single, stifled chuckle from the back of the room. Darren shot to his feet, his face pale, stammering about the footage being potentially edited and requesting a continuance to verify authenticity. Judge Holt shut him down with a look that could have curdled milk. "This was recorded in real time from a third-party wildlife camera," she said, her voice cutting through his panic. "It matches the defendant's trail camera perfectly. I see no evidence of tampering. I do, however, see evidence of reckless behavior and complete disregard for private property." Karen's mouth opened, fish-like, but no words came out. For the first time, she looked genuinely rattled, her sunglasses slipping down her nose. Nina called Carla to the stand next, and the retired schoolteacher delivered her testimony with the dry precision of someone who'd graded too many essays to tolerate nonsense. She explained her wildlife camera's setup, how it had been recording birds and squirrels for years, and how she'd initially thought Karen's crash was just another of her usual antics. Judge Holt asked if Carla had any prior disputes with Karen, and Carla's response was pure gold. Only when she borrowed my kayak and filled it with grass clippings, said she was making a natural spa. The bailiff coughed to cover a laugh, and even Judge Holt's lips twitched. Carla's testimony wasn't just credible. It was devastating, a neutral third party confirming Karen's recklessness in a way no one could dispute. Then came Karen's turn. Darren tried to guide her through a rehearsed narrative, but Karen couldn't help herself. She improvised, piling on embellishments like a kid decorating a lopsided cake. She claimed my lawn gnome had provoked her emotionally, that my koi had glared at her with malevolence, and that the signs were ambiguous, possibly in a foreign language. The room was a mix of stifled laughter and incredulous whispers. Nina's cross-examination was surgical. She asked if Karen had read the signs, and when Karen claimed she hadn't seen them, Nina produced a photo of Karen flipping off one the day before the crash, posing next to it like it was a tourist attraction. The evidence was undeniable, and Karen's stammered excuses only dug her deeper. The final blow came when Nina read a text message Karen had sent to a friend, bragging about her ATV pond jump and ending with, "If I crash, I'll sue. My cousin says they can't touch me." The courtroom froze, the words hanging like a guillotine. Judge Holt's pen scribbled furiously, her face unreadable but stern. She called for a brief recess, and I stepped outside with Nina, who sipped her coffee with the calm satisfaction of a chess player declaring checkmate. "She's done," Nina said, leaning against the courthouse railing. She sank herself. When we returned, Judge Holt's tone had shifted from mild amusement to icy precision. She dismissed Karen's lawsuit with prejudice, meaning it couldn't be refiled, and referred the matter to the district attorney for possible perjury and frivolous litigation charges. But she didn't stop there. In a twist I hadn't expected, she addressed the HOA's role, having reviewed the citations they'd slapped on me after the crash, fines for improper water containment, and unauthorized topographic manipulation, which was just HOA speak for my trench. She called them suspiciously timed and procedurally flawed, ordering a temporary injunction against the HOA's enforcement powers pending a full review. Mitch, still in the gallery, turned the color of a boiled lobster, his dreams of HOA dominance crumbling in real time. Karen stormed out, ripping off her sunglasses and muttering curses, her fake limp more pronounced than ever. Darren trailed behind, avoiding eye contact, his briefcase clutched like a life raft. The neighbors in the gallery clapped quietly, a few exchanging grins. Nina turned to me, her eyes glinting. "Told you she'd sink herself." I nodded, feeling a weight lift, not just from the lawsuit, but from months of Karen's chaos. We'd won, not just in court, but in principle, proving that truth and evidence could outshine even the loudest tantrums. But Karen wasn't done flailing. Days later, an anonymous email blast hit the neighborhood, accusing me of running an illegal koi trafficking ring out of my pond. It included a blurry photo of the koi, circled in red with labels like unlicensed aquatic imports. I laughed so hard I nearly choked, forwarding it to Nina, who laughed even harder. "Let her keep digging," she said. "She'll hit water again." The community, though, was done with Karen's drama. Neighbors started calling the pond Karen's dive site, and kids reenacted her crash with a cardboard ATV at a block party. Carla gifted me a frame still from her 4K video, Karen midair with a speech bubble, "Airborne, baby." I hung it in my living room, a trophy of survival. The HOA, under pressure from the judge's ruling, began to crack. Mitch's emergency meeting to address safety violations backfired when neighbors aired years of grievances: Karen's noise, her borrowing tools and never returning them, her dog fashion show in someone's yard. A petition to oust Mitch circulated, and he fled the meeting, humiliated. Karen tried one last desperate move, filing a police report claiming I'd digitally harassed her by facilitating the memes mocking her crash. She included screenshots of TikToks and tweets, none of which I'd made, one from a user named PawnRecorder69 who was clearly a teenager in another state. Nina filed a counter-report for harassment and false claims, and the county attorney opened an investigation into Karen's malicious litigation. Her crusade was imploding, and she was running out of allies. I decided to reclaim my peace with a pond renovation, hiring local guys to expand it and add a solar-powered fountain. Kids painted a sign, Karen's Final Landing Zone, which I replaced with a plaque, "Private property, respect the splash." A local artist sent me a ceramic figurine of Karen midair on her ATV, captioned, "Flight Risk." I placed it by the pond, a subtle nod to the chaos we'd survived. Karen went quiet, rumors swirling that she'd left town to escape the fallout. Her story became legend, online forums, college classes, even a podcast about ridiculous lawsuits. My backyard was peaceful again, the koi swimming unbothered, the fountain sparkling. I'd learned that entitlement, unchecked, devours its wielder, and that truth, patience, and a good lawyer can outlast even the wildest Karens. The frost crunched under my boots as I walked to the edge of the koi pond, a mug of coffee warming my hands against the early winter chill. The pond was still, its surface a mirror reflecting the bare branches of the oaks and the soft gray of the morning sky. The koi moved slowly beneath, their colors muted but vibrant, unbothered by the chaos that had once disrupted their world. My backyard, my sanctuary, was quiet again, no roar of an ATV, no shouts of an entitled neighbor, no echoes of legal threats. Karen's saga, which had consumed 6 months of my life with its absurdity, had finally faded into the background, like a bad dream you laugh about over breakfast. But as I stood there, sipping my coffee, I knew the story wasn't truly over, not because Karen was still a threat, but because the ripples of her crash had changed this place and me in ways I was only beginning to understand. After the courtroom victory, where Judge Holt had dismantled Karen's lawsuit with the precision of a surgeon and slapped the HOA with an injunction for their shady tactics, Karen's empire of entitlement began to crumble. She'd stormed out of the courthouse, her neck brace and sunglasses a parody of victimhood, muttering curses as her ex-husband lawyer Darren scurried behind her. The neighbors clapped. Carla's framed 4K still of Karen's midair airborne baby moment became my living room's proudest decoration, and the pond earned its nickname, Karen's dive site. But Karen, true to her nature, didn't slink away quietly. She tried one last desperate jab, an anonymous email blast accusing me of running an illegal koi trafficking ring, complete with a blurry photo of my fish circled in red like evidence from a conspiracy theorist's basement. I laughed until my sides hurt, forwarding it to Nina, who laughed even harder. "She's drowning in her own nonsense," Nina said. "Let her keep swinging." The community, though, was done with her. The email was met with eye rolls and memes, one neighbor replying all with a photoshopped image of Karen riding a koi like a rodeo bull. The HOA, under scrutiny from the judge's ruling, faced a reckoning. Mitch, Karen's cousin and the HOA's nepotistic vice president, called an emergency meeting to address safety violations, but it turned into his undoing. Neighbors, emboldened by the court win, unloaded years of grievances: Karen's noise, her unreturned tools, her impromptu dog fashion show in someone's yard. A petition to oust Mitch gained traction, and he fled the meeting, his face crimson, as Carla asked pointedly why the HOA had ignored complaints about Karen for so long. The room erupted in applause, and I realized this wasn't just about me anymore. Karen had become a symbol of unchecked entitlement, and the neighborhood was ready to reclaim its peace. Karen's final act of defiance came in the form of a police report, claiming I'd digitally harassed her by facilitating the viral memes mocking her pond plunge. She included screenshots of TikToks and tweets, one from a user named PondRecorder69, clearly a teenager in another state, none of which I'd made or shared. Nina filed a counter-report for harassment and false claims, and the county attorney opened an investigation into Karen's malicious litigation. Her attempts to weaponize the legal system were backfiring spectacularly, and the irony was almost poetic. After trying to drown me in lawsuits, she was the one neck-deep in consequences. Rumors swirled that she'd left town, staying with family while trying to scrub her online reputation. Her hashtags, #JusticeForKaren, #PondTrauma, had been hijacked by memes of her riding a koi into battle, and the internet had dubbed her Pond Karen, a cautionary tale of hubris. I decided to mark the victory by reclaiming my backyard in the most therapeutic way I knew, a pond renovation. I hired a crew of local guys, good folks who'd heard the story and chuckled as they worked, to expand the pond slightly, adding a deeper section for the koi and a solar-powered fountain that sent gentle arcs of water into the air. It wasn't just maintenance. It was a statement, a middle finger to Karen's chaos, and a love letter to the peace I'd fought for. The neighborhood watched with glee, kids stopping by to gawk at the new fountain and paint a wooden sign that read Karen's final landing zone. I swapped it out for a polished plaque, "Private property, respect the splash." It was subtle but clear, a reminder that boundaries matter, and I'd defend mine with every tool at my disposal. One afternoon, as the crew packed up, a delivery truck rolled in with a package addressed to the pond guy. Inside was a hand-sculpted ceramic figurine from a local artist I didn't know, a woman on an ATV, midair, hair flying, expression caught between shock and thrill. The caption read, "Flight risk." I laughed, placing it near the pond's edge, just visible enough to spark a chuckle but discreet enough to avoid pettiness. Even humor, I figured, should have its limits. The figurine joined the framed 4K still in my living room, a pair of trophies from a battle I hadn't wanted but had won with patience evidence, and a community that refused to bow to Karen's tantrums. The story could have ended there, a neat little tale of justice served, but life has a way of throwing curveballs. A few weeks later, on an unseasonably warm afternoon, I was on the porch, Rusty snoring at my feet, when a black SUV pulled into my driveway. A man in a crisp blazer stepped out, introducing himself as Paul Rivera, a local documentary filmmaker working on a series about bizarre civil court cases. He'd stumbled across Karen's lawsuit through online forums and viral video compilations, and he wanted to interview me for an episode. I laughed, thinking he was joking, but his paperwork and production schedule were real. "You control the narrative," he said, and those words hooked me. I called Carla that night, and she dropped her tea laughing, immediately offering her 4K footage. "If we're telling this story," she said, "we're telling it right." Over the next few days, Paul interviewed neighbors, legal experts, and Nina, who dissected Karen's legal arguments with a smile that could cut glass. The documentary, titled Flight Risk, The Karen Who Sued a Pond, was meant to be humorous but grounded, a reflection on how absurdity spirals when common sense is ignored. When it aired online, it exploded, racking up 2 million views in 3 days. Comment sections buzzed with quotes from the court transcripts, debates about whether Karen deserved a parachute, and praise for Nina's courtroom takedown. The ceramic figurine even made a cameo in the final shot, glinting by the pond as the credits rolled. My backyard, once a private haven, was now internet famous, a symbol of resilience against entitlement. Neighbors started bringing cupcakes to my porch, each frosted with variations of Pond 1, Karen 0. One even set up a folding chair by the pond with a sign, "VIP seating, watch where entitlement lands you." The HOA, now under new leadership, held a community picnic beside the pond, a celebration of boundaries and accountability. I didn't host, but I let them set up tables on the far side, everyone sharing snacks and stories, no ATVs in sight. The event felt like a collective exhale, a reclaiming of the neighborhood spirit after months of Karen's chaos. Then, in a twist I never saw coming, an email arrived from Karen. It was short, just 2 lines. Asterisk, I saw the documentary. You could have made me look worse. You didn't. Thank you. Asterisk, I stared at the screen, rereading it, waiting for the hidden barb that never came. Maybe she'd learned something, maybe not, but it was the closest she'd ever come to humility. I didn't reply. She was gone from my life, and that was enough. Spring arrived, the pond blooming with lily pads, the koi swimming lazily under the surface. The fountain sparkled, the figurine faded slightly in the sun, and I left it there, not as a taunt, but as a reminder that battles are won not with vengeance, but with dignity. On the 1-year anniversary of the crash, I walked to the pond's edge, coffee in hand, and looked out over the water. A dragonfly landed on a lily pad, the ripples spreading gently. Kids laughed in the distance, a lawnmower hummed. Life was normal again, but richer, tempered by a story that had become legend. The neighborhood had changed, not because of the crash or the lawsuit, but because of what came after. A community that found its voice, a clarity that cut through entitlement, and a pond that stood as a testament to resilience. Karen thought she could bend reality to her will, but she forgot one thing: truth doesn't negotiate. It waits, patient and unyielding, until the noise fades and the water stills. So here I stand, by my pond, coffee warm, koi gliding, the world quiet once more. This isn't just a story of a crash or a court win. It's a reminder that peace is worth fighting for, that boundaries are sacred, and that even the wildest chaos can't outlast a man with a good lawyer, a loyal dog, and a pond full of koi. Let the Karens of the world roar. They'll learn, eventually, that entitlement sinks, but truth swims forever. And if you ever doubt it, come sit by my pond, watch the ripples, and smile. We've earned it. The frost crunched under my boots as I walked to the edge of the koi pond, a mug of coffee warming my hands against the early winter chill. The pond was still, its surface a mirror reflecting the bare branches of the oaks and the soft gray of the morning sky. The koi moved slowly beneath, their colors muted but vibrant, unbothered by the chaos that had once disrupted their world. My backyard, my sanctuary, was quiet again, no roar of an ATV, no shouts of an entitled neighbor, no echoes of legal threats. Karen's saga, which had consumed 6 months of my life with its absurdity, had finally faded into the background, like a bad dream you laugh about over breakfast. But as I stood there, sipping my coffee, I knew the story wasn't truly over, not because Karen was still a threat, but because the ripples of her crash had changed this place, and me, in ways I was only beginning to understand. After the courtroom victory, where Judge Holt had dismantled Karen's lawsuit with the precision of a surgeon and slapped the HOA with an injunction for their shady tactics, Karen's empire of entitlement began to crumble. She'd stormed out of the courthouse, her neck brace and sunglasses a parody of victimhood, muttering curses as her ex-husband lawyer Darren scurried behind her. The neighbors clapped. Carla's framed 4K still of Karen's midair airborne baby moment became my living room's proudest decoration, and the pond earned its nickname, Karen's dive site. But Karen, true to her nature, didn't slink away quietly. She tried one last desperate jab, an anonymous email blast accusing me of running an illegal koi trafficking ring, complete with a blurry photo of my fish circled in red like evidence from a conspiracy theorist's basement. I laughed until my sides hurt, forwarding it to Nina, who laughed even harder. "She's drowning in her own nonsense," Nina said. "Let her keep swinging." The community, though, was done with her. The email was met with eye rolls and memes, one neighbor replying all with a photoshopped image of Karen riding a koi like a rodeo bull. The HOA, under scrutiny from the judge's ruling, faced a reckoning. Mitch, Karen's cousin and the HOA's nepotistic vice president, called an emergency meeting to address safety violations, but it turned into his undoing. Neighbors, emboldened by the court win, unloaded years of grievances: Karen's noise, her unreturned tools, her impromptu dog fashion show in someone's yard. A petition to oust Mitch gained traction, and he fled the meeting, his face crimson, as Carla asked pointedly why the HOA had ignored complaints about Karen for so long. The room erupted in applause, and I realized this wasn't just about me anymore. Karen had become a symbol of unchecked entitlement, and the neighborhood was ready to reclaim its peace. Karen's final act of defiance came in the form of a police report, claiming I'd digitally harassed her by facilitating the viral memes mocking her pond plunge. She included screenshots of TikToks and tweets, one from a user named PondRecorder69, clearly a teenager in another state, none of which I'd made or shared. Nina filed a counter-report for harassment and false claims, and the county attorney opened an investigation into Karen's malicious litigation. Her attempts to weaponize the legal system were backfiring spectacularly, and the irony was almost poetic. After trying to drown me in lawsuits, she was the one neck-deep in consequences. Rumors swirled that she'd left town, staying with family while trying to scrub her online reputation. Her hashtags, #JusticeForKaren, #PondTrauma, had been hijacked by memes of her riding a koi into battle, and the internet had dubbed her Pond Karen, a cautionary tale of hubris. I decided to mark the victory by reclaiming my backyard in the most therapeutic way I knew, a pond renovation. I hired a crew of local guys, good folks who'd heard the story and chuckled as they worked, to expand the pond slightly, adding a deeper section for the koi and a solar-powered fountain that sent gentle arcs of water into the air. It wasn't just maintenance. It was a statement, a middle finger to Karen's chaos, and a love letter to the peace I'd fought for. The neighborhood watched with glee, kids stopping by to gawk at the new fountain and paint a wooden sign that read Karen's Final Landing Zone. I swapped it out for a polished plaque, "Private property, respect the splash." It was subtle but clear, a reminder that boundaries matter, and I'd defend mine with every tool at my disposal. One afternoon, as the crew packed up, a delivery truck rolled in with a package addressed to the pond guy. Inside was a hand-sculpted ceramic figurine from a local artist I didn't know, a woman on an ATV, midair, hair flying, expression caught between shock and thrill. The caption read, "Flight Risk." I laughed, placing it near the pond's edge, just visible enough to spark a chuckle but discreet enough to avoid pettiness. Even humor, I figured, should have its limits. The figurine joined the framed 4K, still in my living room, a pair of trophies from a battle I hadn't wanted, but had won with patience, evidence, and a community that refused to bow to Karen's tantrums. The story could have ended there, a neat little tale of justice served, but life has a way of throwing curveballs. A few weeks later, on an unseasonably warm afternoon, I was on the porch, Rusty snoring at my feet, when a black SUV pulled into my driveway. A man in a crisp blazer stepped out, introducing himself as Paul Rivera, a local documentary filmmaker working on a series about bizarre civil court cases. He'd stumbled across Karen's lawsuit through online forums and viral video compilations, and he wanted to interview me for an episode. I laughed, thinking he was joking, but his paperwork and production schedule were real. "You control the narrative," he said, and those words hooked me. I called Carla that night, and she dropped her tea laughing, immediately offering her 4K footage. "If we're telling this story," she said, "we're telling it right." Over the next few days, Paul interviewed neighbors, legal experts, and Nina, who dissected Karen's legal arguments with a smile that could cut glass. The documentary, titled Flight Risk, The Karen Who Sued a Pond, was meant to be humorous, but grounded, a reflection on how absurdity spirals when common sense is ignored. When it aired online, it exploded, racking up 2 million views in 3 days. Comment sections buzzed with quotes from the court transcripts, debates about whether Karen deserved a parachute, and praise for Nina's courtroom takedown. The ceramic figurine even made a cameo in the final shot, glinting by the pond as the credits rolled. My backyard, once a private haven, was now internet famous, a symbol of resilience against entitlement. Neighbors started bringing cupcakes to my porch, each frosted with variations of Pond 1, Karen 0. One even set up a folding chair by the pond with a sign, "VIP seating, watch where entitlement lands you." The HOA, now under new leadership, held a community picnic beside the pond, a celebration of boundaries and accountability. I didn't host, but I let them set up tables on the far side, everyone sharing snacks and stories, no ATVs in sight. The event felt like a collective exhale, a reclaiming of the neighborhood spirit after months of Karen's chaos. Then, in a twist I never saw coming, an email arrived from Karen. It was short, just 2 lines. Asterisk, I saw the documentary. You could have made me look worse. You didn't. Thank you. Asterisk, I stared at the screen, rereading it, waiting for the hidden barb that never came. Maybe she'd learned something, maybe not, but it was the closest she'd ever come to humility. I didn't reply. She was gone from my life, and that was enough. Spring arrived, the pond blooming with lily pads, the koi swimming lazily under the surface. The fountain sparkled, the figurine faded slightly in the sun, and I left it there, not as a taunt, but as a reminder that battles are won not with vengeance, but with dignity. On the 1-year anniversary of the crash, I walked to the pond's edge, coffee in hand, and looked out over the water. A dragonfly landed on a lily pad, the ripples spreading gently. Kids laughed in the distance, a lawnmower hummed, life was normal again, but richer, tempered by a story that had become legend. The neighborhood had changed, not because of the crash or the lawsuit, but because of what came after, a community that found its voice, a clarity that cut through entitlement, and a pond that stood as a testament to resilience. Karen thought she could bend reality to her will, but she forgot one thing: truth doesn't negotiate. It waits, patient and unyielding, until the noise fades and the water stills. So here I stand, by my pond, coffee warm, koi gliding, the world quiet once more. This isn't just a story of a crash or a court win. It's a reminder that peace is worth fighting for, that boundaries are sacred, and that even the wildest chaos can't outlast a man with a good lawyer, a loyal dog, and a pond full of koi. Let the Karens of the world roar. They'll learn, eventually, that entitlement sinks, but truth swims forever. And if you ever doubt it, come sit by my pond, watch the ripples, and smile. We've earned it.